Spirit, please, and join us in our opening hymn.
Good. Welcome to Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Lakeland. Our mission here at UUCL is love plus connection equals transformation. I call you now into this connection part by lifting up some of the opportunities for being together that will be happening around today. This Wednesday is Popcorn Theology. Floyd Love will be presenting his selection, The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. Arrive to the sanctuary at 6:30. Movie starts at 7. During next Sunday's worship service, Melissa and Heather will be doing a blessing of the backpacks. Students and teachers of any age are welcome to join us for this annual back-to-school event. In addition to that, Amber Bridges will be giving a message that explores Unitarian Universalist themes in Star Trek. And thank you to the First Friday coordinators and volunteers, Baisel Decour, Amber Bridges, Catherine Steele, and Nick Whitlock, and their children. For those of you who saw, we just played a video of the First Friday. And also a reminder, next week is potluck. All of this and much more is in our e-newsletter that's published every Wednesday and posted in our hallway bulletin board. Great care is taken each week to provide this to you, so please read it and find the ways you would like to engage in this community. If you're new, you're welcome to sign up on the sheet in the hallway or put your email in the chat feature to request to receive it so that you can get connected to this caring community. So good morning, my name is Ken Wechter. I serve this congregation as chair of the Board of Trustees. I use pronouns he and him. Welcome to our sanctuary. Our opening words were written by Reverend Kimberly Ann Tom Sack Carlson, called A Place of Belonging and Caring. It is not by chance that you arrived here today. You have been looking for something larger than yourself. Inside of you there is a yearning, a calling, a hope for more, a desire for a place of belonging and caring. Through your struggles, someone nurtured you into being, instilling a belief in a shared purpose, a common yet precious resource that belongs to all of us when we share. And so, you began seeking a beloved community, a people that does not put fences around love, a community that holds its arms open to possibilities of love, a heart home to nourish your soul and share your gifts. Welcome home, welcome to worship. Let us create this sacred space our shared home in the spirit of love by lighting our chalice. Please join me in singing and signing Spirit of Life, hymn number 123, as Tim McLean comes forward to light our chalice. We are the keepers of a dream to build and grow a Unitarian Universalist congregation here in Lakeland, tucked back into this friendly neighborhood next to the tall ponds. We are those that were dreamt of, and we are the dreamers. We keep this vision alive by contributing our time, talent, and treasure. So in this moment, we will take up an offering that will sustain and strengthen this life-giving community. Ushers will pass the plates. Next up for our message today is Ben Basile. You may remember him from a couple of weeks ago. People liked his dad jokes so much that we asked him back again. This week he has a message for us about the incredible shrinking church.
Thank you, Ken. It's a pleasure and a delight to have an opportunity to fulfill this role for today. This morning I want to take a look at the issue of declining church membership and what that might mean to us as UUs. More specifically, I want to talk about, and it is a very broad subject, so I want to sharpen that focus a bit. First, we're going to talk about this trend in American churches in general. Then I want to look at how that's working for us in the Unitarian Universalist Association. And by the way, let me throw this in just as a side note. Technically speaking, the UUA is not a denomination within the American Christian Church, and I'm aware of that. You probably know, or you may have heard, that we have observer status in the National Council of Churches. So we don't define ourselves, I mean, broadly, corporately. Of course, individual UUs may not all feel the same about this, but broadly, our organization doesn't put ourselves into that bucket. But I'm going to, for my purposes today, in talking about these trends and how it affects us, and how it actually gives us an opportunity, for those purposes today, I'm going to talk about our movement and our association as though it were, on the practical level, it kind of makes sense. And as we go forward, I think you'll understand what I mean by that. So we're going to look at this trend in general. Then we're going to look at how it's working for us. And then the third main point that we're going to take a look at today is how it does, as I said just a moment ago, how it does present an opportunity for us. All right, now, some of the reasons for this general decline, I'll be listing 4 today. First of all, traditionally churches, and I'm really oversimplifying things here, but traditionally there are 2 kind of constituent groups that make up a huge chunk of church membership in most organizations. I'll call the first traditionalists or pew sitters, folks who just really liked being in church or were sort of conditioned culturally to participate. That's a lot of folks. And then the second group I define as, so many ways you could describe this, but the true believers. The literalists, folks who think that every word in the Christian scriptures is literally true in every way, scientifically, historically, prophetically. And between those 2 groups, that's a huge chunk of church membership. Now, the interesting thing is even though those 2 groups don't necessarily have a whole lot in common, what they do is that, excuse me, they're aging. And I don't have to tell anybody here, but this is something that happens this is happening all across the board. Now, I'm a baby boomer. I'm turning 69 this month. And that's kind of what you find in so many Unitarian churches. And it's true of so many in general. You know, everything I like is aging out. I do play music, did before I started losing my voice and so on. And real big into jazz and blues, and those groups are aging out. They really are, you know. So many things that I like, and boomers are certainly not above criticism. We've done some things well and some other things not well, but our lease on the pool hall will soon be up, and this is certainly true in churches as well. I don't think we need to we don't need to quake in fear of this, and as we go forward today in this sermon, you'll see what I mean by that. So folks, there sum up what I was saying on this particular point is that there's a huge generational difference in how folks look at church membership and things of a spiritual nature. Now, the second reason that you see a broad decline in so many churches and spiritual bodies, there's been a huge increase in what we sometimes call the none of the aboves, or folks who will say, well, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And that probably describes most of us here, and it certainly does. My own personal spiritual journey that landed me here in the Unitarian Church back in, not this congregation, but landed me in a Unitarian congregation back in 1992, was sort of, it fits in with this idea of spiritual but not religious. And a feeling on my part that I didn't want to be a part of organized religion anymore, or the flavor of organized religion that I grew up in. And I'll talk more about my personal take on some of these things a little bit later. Now, a third reason why churches are hemorrhaging members right now, and have been for many years, is a reaction against the moral failings among clergy and even lay folks in many areas, but especially when you look at the horrible issue of sexual abuse of members, and in many cases children. I don't have to tell you, this has sent a lot of folks out of the mainline churches. And that's been a problem. It's not confined to any one denomination. Probably this ugly process has been most publicized in relation to the Catholic Church. And there's a whole larger issue there about celibacy for clerics, for ministers. But this has been going on in many churches, but it hasn't drawn the same attention. I don't know if you guys noticed this, but there's a huge scandal in the Southern Baptist Convention right now over child sexual abuse. It's kind of been under the radar, but I pay attention to things like this. I subscribe to a religion news service, which is a great thing, by the way. If you ever Google that, you'll find an internet publication called Religion News Service, and they're they look at all groups, including pagans and UUs, and a lot of things that have kind of exploded lately is the schism in the United Methodist Church. That was one of the stops in my own spiritual journey. I was a candidate for ministry in the United Methodist Church in a past life. And so I do pay close attention to that. And that's pretty much centered around how you approach your LGBT members. Not an issue that we have to fight over here, because we have been for marriage equality and for acceptance of everybody for a very, very, very long time. But guys, this just split the United Methodist Church wide open. And that's a big historic church. So before I leave this point, let me go back to what I said just a moment ago. The scandal of child sexual abuse is recently exploded in the Southern Baptist Convention. And what makes that even ugly, well, no limit to how ugly this is whenever it surfaces. Excuse me, I do have an issue with my voice. I lose it from time to time. But one of the things that made this just mega ugly is that in the Southern Baptist Convention, they went to extreme lengths to keep the lid on it. And now I mean, I suppose that's something that does happen whenever this sort of thing comes to light. But like, regrettably, we saw in the Catholic Church, the ministries and the national body, they're kind of decentralized like we are, yet the National Convention does wield some kind of power and influence in matters like this. And they went to great lengths to sweep it all under the rug, and now it's coming to light. And that only happened because some of their delegates to their annual national convention raised a stink about it for many years in convention. Finally, they had to listen and they had to take action. And there were cases of horrible abuse that had remained hidden for a very long time. So anyhow, this horrible issue is one of the things that is driving folks out of traditional churches. And it's not confined to any one religious group. Now, a fourth thing that is driving this exodus of many churches today is a reaction against some extreme ideas, especially that nexus between religious issues and political issues. And I no doubt you have gotten wind of a lot of this. It's something that's very near and dear to my heart because in the churches where I grew up and in my experience in college was already some really crazy, extreme stuff. And as you know, it's really exploded in recent years. You guys, this whole thing about our former president, I have to take a deep breath there. And how he's been put on a pedestal by many folks in evangelical churches. If you hadn't heard this statistic, let me blow your mind. 70% of members of evangelical churches still support this con man. And this could be fodder for this could be material for a whole other sermon. I'm not going to go there. There's that larger issue of tax-exempt status of churches and that prohibition of getting into politics. By the way, which evangelical churches, they discarded that rule a very, very long time ago. Anyhow, the former president still enjoys huge support among evangelicals. Now here's the point. It's splitting evangelical churches apart. And it's another reason why folks are voting with their feet, so to speak, and leaving those churches in droves. I keep my eye on how this plays out too, and it's become a very, very, very big deal. So these things, how the constituency, the members of many churches are aging and graying out, and to say it candidly, dying, is a very big deal. The increase in none of the aboves, or folks who say I'm spiritual but I'm not religious, has been a very big factor. The reaction against all kinds of terrible things, including clergy abuse, is sending a lot of folks out of these churches, and a reaction to extreme ideas, and the mixing of religion and politics also play a very, very big role. Now, church membership is, the decline in church membership is not something new. It's been going on for roughly 50 years. I'm going to give you some statistics from the Gallup organization. Back in 2020, the percentage of Americans who were members of churches or synagogues or mosques, any organized religious thing, the percentage of Americans who were members for the very, very first time dipped below 50%. So you can no longer say that a majority of Americans are opting for church membership. And this illustrates this steep decline that I've been talking about. The number was down from 50% just 3 years previous to that, so 2018. And the percentage of Americans who were members of organized churches was 70% in 1999. So that's a pretty steep decline. In just 11 years, you saw it go from 70% in 2018 down to 50, and now, well, actually, of course, this trend is continuing, even though I don't have statistics for you about it, but it did dip below that 50% mark to 40% as of 2020, so 3 years ago. And those statistics are from the Gallup organization, and it illustrates this trend. Now, as far as how UUs are doing, I'm sure you were wondering about that as I go down my thoughts today. We're holding our own. The bad news is we are losing membership. The good news is at a very, very, very low rate. For so many churches, it's kind of falling off a cliff, and for us, it's more like this. Okay? So as of 2021, we officially had 148,529 members, and they are in, by the way, there is something called the Church of the Larger Fellowship for folks who aren't anywhere near a congregation or who just choose to kind of be solo practitioners, so to speak. But that aside, the 148,000 members are participating in 1,029 congregations. So that's a little over 148,000 members, a little over 1,000 congregations, and then some solo practitioners that are out there. Now, the UUA, when they put together these numbers, also listed 63,919 non-member friends. And most congregations have folks that are not official members, but are active and participants in the church. I just mentioned briefly that I came into the UUA in 1992 at a really large congregation, the First Unitarian Church of Orlando. By the way, they voted not to, after the merger, they voted not to put Unitarian Universalist in their name simply because they had been around since 1909 and predated the merger by such a long period of time. They opted to just the official name to be the First Unitarian Church of Orlando. Anyhow, so I came into the UUA in a large congregation, and a whole lot of the folks that were active in our church, we're no longer official members. And so I was active and an official member for about 8 years, and had the privilege of chairing the worship committee for a while and was a worship associate. And then there was a period of about 15 years where I counted myself in, so to speak. I would raise my hand and say, yes, I'm a Unitarian Universalist, but I wasn't officially on the roll. So in that last time we put together statistics, there were 63,000 folks like that who were active in a congregation but were not official. Now, by the way, let me go into a little more detail about how that works out. We officially count folks who are active, who've completed that new member class, and who are pledging. So I'm not sure I have the exact correct take on this, but to just enlarge on that a bit, if you are active in the church but you didn't pledge, and this is not a plea for pledging, I'm just explaining how this is a part of that whole issue of who is a member and who isn't, or who would show up in the statistics. So although I'm not sure I have the exact right take on this, if you're active in the congregation but you didn't pledge, you would not be included in those numbers. And the reason I'm saying that is it's really different in the churches where I grew up, where once you joined, you probably pledged. And by the way, the churches where I grew up, tithing was a standard practice, and I did participate in that for many years, before there were children to be raised, etc. But if you didn't pledge, you were not removed officially from the role of the church. You were still considered a member. And then there were other folks who were not technically members, such as we do see here a lot, but were in their numbers, you know. And so they would often say members and friends. And how that would work is if you joined the churches where I grew up, you were a member unless you said, take me off the roll, or you joined a different church. So it makes the whole issue of these numbers and exactly where we stand a little, I would say, complicated. By the way, the last number that I'll throw out as far as us, the Unitarians, is that there are 800,000 folks in America who, when they are polled, says, I'm a Unitarian Universalist. So that's a much greater number than the numbers I just threw out as far as how many, members we have. And I find that really interesting. And as I was saying before I go to the next point, I was in that category for about 13 years before I said, let me see if there's a Unitarian congregation in Lakeland. And was very glad that I did that. I officially became a member back in November. Why, thank you very much. I really do feel at home here. It's a wonderful thing. Now, because of all the factors that I listed before, there is a steep decline going on. And there are exceptions, so let me just quickly mention this. Many of the churches who are doing well, when they get together, congregate on a Sunday like we're doing, honestly, it's a little more, I would say, like entertainment and not so much worship the way we would think of it traditionally. And most mega churches, they're really good at that. They're really good at that. They'll have a whole technical staff. Most of them have a band, which we do, although, we don't see them every week, of course. We may have a band, a choir and a band, and sometimes even an orchestra. Now, you won't see all of those groups functioning, every Sunday, but they have a huge following. And if you have a church with 10,000, 20,000 members, you will find folks with these different talents and skills. And, folks love that. So that's a feature of many churches that are thriving, even though church membership in general is declining very quickly. Another thing that churches that are thriving, that you'll find in many of them, is a kind of a small group ministry. And we do have that here. And another factor, and I got a belly full of this, I'm not going to go to great lengths about my own spiritual journey, but I took my degree in a past life from Oral Roberts University, which, as some of you know, is not only, I would consider it extreme in many ways. Not only that, but it's literally the university that is kind of the mecca or the focal point of the charismatic movement in the American church. So I got a belly full of that, and I reluctantly embraced some of the elements of that in the middle of my undergraduate time, and then by the time I was getting near my degree, I wanted no part of that. And it was many years later that I sort of considered myself basically in the post-Christian phase of my spiritual existence, but I rejected that part of it and distanced from it even while I was still there. My wife at the time worked in the Oral Roberts Evangelistic Association after she graduated. In other words, the mail mill that processed those, 200,000 donations and checks that came in every month. Oral had quite an enterprise going there, and it required a lot of money. And some of you may have heard, and I know this goes back many, many years, but some of the extreme things he said and did to keep those contributions flowing in. And that was one of the things that led to my disenchantment at that time. And then I did complete the first year of seminary there later after a brief time in the service. And all of those things pointed me in the direction of the exit. Although I did receive a very good education there. An education with kind of a slant, but it's a very solid school academically. Now, another thing that you'll find in a lot of the churches that are thriving is this whole thing of what is often called the prosperity gospel. In other words, God doesn't just want you to be good spiritually, and be saved or kind of reconciled to this God who is going to throw you in hell if you don't get it right. So not only do you get that reconciliation with God and your fellows, but we're going to put some money in your pocket, and so you can become rich. We want you to prosper even as your soul prospers. That's one of their favorite verses that they go on and on and on and on about. Well, folks, that does have kind of a draw. So some of the churches that are still thriving, it's that sort of thing. You think of Joel Osteen, or Creflo Dollar, some of those cats, and they're living well. And the whole thing is, and you can too if you embrace this gospel. It's kind of basically a pyramid scheme. And I certainly got a belly full of that, and I don't like it. But it sells. A lot of folks will ride that train. And spoiler, most of them are not getting rich, but the minister certainly is. Now, what I want you to think, when you take a step back and look at this process, kind of look at the larger issue, it's more than a little bit. It's a whole lot like what is happening with the financial sphere. More and more of the wealth, and in this case, more and more of the church membership, is being concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. So it's kind of like now, many of you know the middle class has been shrinking for a while, and the last couple of years, thank you, President Biden, have reversed this trend so much, to a certain extent. But in general, the rich are definitely getting richer, and the poor are definitely fulfilling their half of that cliche. And this is happening in churches too, where you have these mega churches with 15 or 20,000 members and a budget that rivals many counties. And then you have churches on every corner in town that are shuttered and have that for sale sign out front where the minister's name and the service times used to be posted. So this is happening, and unfortunately, I don't see this trend reversing, but many churches who are of a more traditional slant are disappearing all the time. In the meantime, we are holding our own. Now, just one quick thought about how some of this extremism helped propel me out. Some of you may remember in 1973, the Yom Kippur War broke out. And at ORU, we went crazy over this because we were convinced that it was the very first event in a chain of events that was going to lead to Jesus coming back very, very, very soon. And just to give you a quick idea into how thoroughly I bought into that, I did not pre-enroll for my fall classes in my sophomore year. It was like, why bother? You know, Jesus is coming back and you're going to fold the tent very soon. And it would be quite a few years before I could look critically at some of these things that I learned as a church boy and then later in my university experiences. But I totally bought into that. Yes, I did come back and got the classes that I needed and eventually graduated, but I seriously did not pre-enroll the previous semester before our summer break. And I could give example after example after example of that sort of thing. Now, folks, that's sort of the bad news part of what I'm going to tell you about today. Now, here's the good news. As these folks exit these traditional churches, I really think it does present an opportunity for us. Because the kind of thing that I was describing with my own spiritual journey, that's very, very, very common thing. I was a little ahead of the curve. Well, and that has always happened too, not just the trend of folks leaving, but folks saying, okay, well, I don't know what an authentic spirituality would be like. I don't know what a good church would be like. But I know what it's not. It's not that stuff that was crammed down my throat for all those years that I was in one of those really traditional churches. So we have hundreds of, well, no, we have millions of people exiting churches who essentially are spiritually disenfranchised, or what I call spiritual orphans. There are lots of those folks, and it's something that I notice a lot just because I certainly fit into that category. Now, what would you folks think would be a typical Unitarian or a typical congregation? I think we probably fit in there pretty well. So as you think back over your own experiences, there are so many folks out there who would be a really good fit for us and for what we do, but they probably don't know about us. Now, let me just give you, from my own personal point of view, some things that I do say to people occasionally when I do talk. Boy, in my past life, we'd call it witnessing, right? And we had this whole collection of verses where we'd make sure these folks knew that although he's a loving God, you're going to go to hell if you don't jump on the train. And we had kind of a track, many churches did. And I knew how to lead folks down the Roman road. You know, a lot of those scriptures were from the book of Romans. And here, of course, we don't do stuff like that. But I think we sort of err on the other side, where we rarely talk about our Unitarian faith and what we're all about. And I think there are lots of folks who would be a great fit for us here. So here's some of the things that I say to folks when I do talk about my experience as a UU and how it's had a big effect on my life, and it's been a really good thing for me. I say, you know, I go to that hippie church. I think that's not a bad kind of starting point. You know, or I'll say, here's what I really like about the Unitarian Church, and folks forgive me, but I don't usually say Unitarian Universalist. Just it's a little bit cumbersome, and I don't mean to slight the, that's a huge thread in our in the composition of the UUA today. But I often abbreviate it and say Unitarian. So I'll say, one of the cool things I really like about the Unitarian Church is it's sort of church light. You know, everything you wanted in a church and less, not the sin, death, hell, judgment, burn in hell forever. It's funny, I heard somebody who was also a fugitive from fundamentalism. And by the way, the term ex-evangelical is really common today. I follow some folks on Twitter who also use that hashtag a lot. But I heard one of those folks say once that he could distill that traditional Christian message in this one phrase. Summed it all up in this: God loves you so much that he's going to burn you in hell forever if you don't love him back. And that really resonated with me. It's like, wow, that's kind of, if you summed it up in one sentence, that kind of describes it. And so many folks who don't want that anymore would be a great fit for us. So I'll often say we're church light. If you don't remember that light beer by Miller ad campaign, you may not realize how snappy that is. And that's what I tell folks. It's church, but without the sin, death, hell, judgment, and all of that. Or I will sometimes say to folks, we're a free spirit kind of a church. We don't tell you what you have to believe. And that is not a bad starting point sometimes if you're trying to describe to people why you're a UU and why you really like it here. Well, guys, what do we have to offer to these spiritual orphans? How about we can tell them that we recognize and promote their worth and dignity and that of every member of the human family. So there's our first principle. I'm not going to hit all of them, by the way. Now, how about we can tell these spiritual orphans that we will encourage their personal spiritual growth? That's our third principle. And by the way, guys, if we stay tied up, as so many unfortunate folks do, in God's going to send me to hell, I better get this right, then we don't grow spiritually. It's a real obstacle to spiritual growth because we're just in this neurotic dread of being thrown into hell forever when we die. So we do encourage folks' spiritual growth here, and that's our third principle. Well, here's something we can offer them. How about that free and responsible search for truth and meaning, as opposed to a set-in-stone bag of dogma that they have to accept word for word, or, as you know, it's not going to end well for them. So that free and responsible search for meaning is a big thing, and I think it's one of the things we like best, or one of the best things about the UUA, and of course that is our fourth principle. All right, how about that if they come on board with us, we'll never expect them to go against their conscience, and that we'll always do our business together using a democratic process, meaning they don't have to just meekly accept a creed, ancient rules or doctrines or church policies, and that, of course, is our fifth principle. All right, how about this? Our overarching goal is achieving peace and liberty and justice for all. We don't just give lip service to those things, but because we care passionately about social justice, we're actually working to try to make those things happen. So what's wrong with justice, liberty and justice for all? Well, folks, that is our sixth principle. Now, how about this? How about caring for our planet? How urgent is that? And more people, spiritual seekers especially, are seeing how terribly that urgent that is right now, to care for our planet and to see that we are a part of that interdependent web of existence, and we're all a part of that. Well, there's our seventh principle. So we certainly have a lot to offer some of these spiritual orphans. Now, I think our principles sound great to these folks, and I think they're going to give it very close, if not enthusiastic, consideration in due time, when they're ready, just like you did, just like I did. There may be some folks here who are cradle Unitarians. There we go. But there may be some here. But honestly, in the years that, I love that. As the evangelist used to say, I see that hand. Won't go there right at this moment. But there are some cradle Unitarians. But most of us came to this as, I hope, our final destination on our spiritual journeys. So, and just as it worked for us, I think it could work for them. And there are millions, folks, who are fed up. They're fed up and hurting. They're hurting and angry. They're angry and confused. And sometimes they don't know what they want or where they're headed, but they know it isn't that stuff they're leaving behind, that stuff that puts a knot in their stomach and makes them feel less than and judged and condemned and on the outside of the community. Well, are these guys condemned to just make their brunch reservation every Sunday? I hope not. And by the way, I love brunch. But is that going to be their Sunday experience until Judgment Day? Oh, I no longer believe that Judgment Day is a thing. But you get the idea. Is that all there is for those folks? And I think not. And here we have things that are very much valued by everybody, especially these fugitives who feel like they can't go back home. How about love and acceptance? How about a listening ear and a caring hand? How about those monthly potlucks? Reminds me of something I see on a t-shirt now and then at my work at Disney. It said, "Come over to the dark side, we have cookies." T-shirt doesn't make total sense to me. I'm rebellion all the way, not empire. But in all seriousness, I'm encouraging you today to have confidence in what you and what all of us together have to offer these folks who are disenchanted and disaffected and are looking for a spiritual home. They may not be actively seeking, but they want that and they need that, even if they're kind of afraid to take a look around and see what is out there. So have confidence in that. Hold those principles that we embrace and the loving community that we are building together close to your heart. What I'm saying is, keep the faith. Now, don't think for a minute that all these things are just for you and that they're just platitudes or half-baked ideas that we carry around in our heads. No, we need to carry it with us out there. So live your faith. And never forget that every good gift in life, yeah, it's meant for you, it's meant for me, but not only for us, it's meant for everybody. So when it comes to those spiritual treasures that we discover here, share your faith.
Thank you, Ben, for that message. I'm going to find my place. Okay, so we are going to move into our joys and sorrows. We came into this sanctuary, our spiritual home, with many threads of joys and sorrows from our varied lives. And while we sat and sang and listened to the morning's message together, these threads were woven deeper into the fabric of our lives, transforming us towards our more loving and compassionate selves. We honor this transformation by taking a moment to reflect on these joys, sorrows, and meaningful moments. You're invited to come forward and place a rock in the sand in the shared bowl. words are by William F. Schultz. This is the mission of our faith, to teach the fragile art of hospitality, to revere both the critical mind and the generous heart, to prove that diversity need not mean divisiveness, and to witness to all that we must hold the whole world in our hands. Our closing hymn will be number 145, Tranquil Streams.
Please rise in mind spirit. This is what the tune sounds like.
We have one quick announcement myself.
Thank you, Ken. I just wanted to first thank Ken and Ben for this great service, Ken for leading and Ben reminding us of our principles and church. I just want to mention these brochures that were prepared for the Pride in the Park. We made a little bit adjustment that inside we have the Spirit of Life and Child Extinguishing Words. Basically, I believe there are people who needs to hear our message and learn our principles, which are in your circles. That may be a friend of yours, a relative, or next door neighborhood. But I'm thinking that you may think that they need to hear this message. So if you could take one of those brochures and share with them, I'll be grateful. And maybe they'll consider to come one of our future services or watch us on the Facebook or other things. So with that, I thank you all.
So please join me as we extinguish our chalice.
We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of love, or the fire of commitment. These carry in our hearts and out into the world.
The benediction today comes from Laurelyn Bellamy. If here you have found freedom, take it with you out into the world. If you have found comfort, go and share it with others. If you have dreamed dreams, help one another that they may come true. If you have known love, give some back to a bruised